Cade mentally closed the status screen and let out a deep exhale. For several moments he just lay on his back with his eyes closed and breathed, feeling the air enter and exit his lungs. His entire body ached, his channels burned, and the wound in his soul throbbed with an agony he didn't know could exist. But he had done it. He had defeated Sildraxa, eliminated her corruption from the realm, and had even grown a new great tree after he was forced to destroy the old one. As he lay there breathing, his attention drifted back to the rhizome still active within him. Multicolored flashes of lightning streaked across his vision. The rhizome was doing something, but he didn't know what exactly. At least the pain in his eyes and face had begun to fade. Or maybe his nerves were too overloaded with everything else going on in his body to feel his eyes properly. Cade mustered his will and cracked his eyes open. Just a fraction. Just enough to probe his vision. There wasn't nearly as much pain as there was when Sildraxa's corruption still festered within, but his vision had not completely returned. The world above him looked like a grey haze streaked with multicolored lightning. Almost as if he were enveloped in a storm cloud. His vision had improved, but not enough to make out more than vague shapes and shifting light. Cade couldn't tell whether the rhizome was responsible or his body was regenerating on its own. Either way, he felt like his eyes were slowly healing. After everything that had happened, he wanted to see the new great tree for himself, but that would have to wait. In truth, Cade had been worried Sildraxa's attack had permanently damaged his vision. He just didn't want to focus on it as there were bigger concerns he needed to address. However, now that he was laying here with nothing to preoccupy his mind, his damaged vision had started to worry him. Sure, it was making progress towards healing, but was he irreparably damaged from Sildraxa's attack? Would he ever be able to see properly again? He didn't know. The evidence supported that his eyes were healing. He just had to give it time and wait. Besides, even if they didn't heal on their own, he was sure he could find a way to fix them eventually. Maybe once he went back to the tutorial he could find Amanda. She might be able to heal whatever damage remained. Cade closed his eyes again and sat up, his cloak effortlessly shifting around his form. As he moved his legs to stand, his foot knocked into something small, hard, and round. He had completely forgotten about the sphere the rhizome had brought up from deep underground. With one fumbling hand he reached down and grabbed it. As soon as his fingers wrapped around the object, a new system message popped into his mind. Tutorial Dungeon Core obtained. Destroy the Dungeon Core to return to the tutorial. Warning, destroying the tutorial Dungeon Core will destabilize Cynthia's legacy. All party members must be within 10 meters of the Dungeon Core to ensure safe transport back to the tutorial before the dungeon collapses. What the fuck? Cade couldn't help but say as he read through the message in his mind. Why would destroying the core send me back to the tutorial? Why would the system design it this way? Cade frowned. There was no way the system had created a dungeon within the tutorial only for it to be destroyed by the first creature who found its core. This was supposed to be a realm to train Acleon, the Viscount of the Swamp. There had to be another way out. Then again, this wasn't a normal dungeon. The system itself had classified Cynthia's legacy as corrupted even before he had entered. Maybe this situation only existed because Sildraxa had corrupted the realm and the original exit had been destroyed along with the old great tree. Cade didn't know, and he could feel his chest tighten as his thoughts raced. Even the suggestion of destabilizing this realm unnerved him. He had spent weeks here. He had fought alongside the legacy's inhabitants. Learned from them. Reforged his body, gained powerful skills, cultivated law seeds, and was an entirely new person thanks to the unique opportunities this realm provided. He even rebuilt the fucking great tree itself only to find out that his way back to the tutorial required dooming everything within to collapse. Sure, he wanted to return to the tutorial. But was it worth condemning the frogs, tortoises, and even Acleon to whatever fate awaited them after he left? Would the system spit them out in the tutorial with him? Or would they simply cease to exist as the realm destabilized? Cade's thoughts were interrupted by a rumbling laugh that reminded him of two massive boulders grinding together. He immediately recognized the voice, and relief washed through him as the familiar presence eased some of the tension he still carried. Vorduin was alive, and if he was laughing then that likely meant the other tortoises were as well. But what of Pearl and Acleon? Had they made it out safely? The ground beneath him trembled with slow, deliberate impacts as the ancient tortoise approached. There were plenty of questions he needed answered, and Vorduin had proven more than helpful before. Cade still intended to learn how to form his own core, but there were more pressing things he needed to discuss with the newly ascended Emperor first. Vorduin, Cade said as he struggled to put his feet under him, the dungeon core still firm in his grasp. Pearl and Akalian, are they all right? The others too. The ancient tortoise let out another low rumble of amusement. They live. Relief immediately flooded through Cade. Good. I was worried. Vorduin chuckled. They are unharmed, if somewhat shocked by what they witnessed. The Emperor paused briefly. I suspect several of the younger tortoises will be speaking of your display for many cycles to come. Cade grimaced, but his expression only deepened Vorduin's amusement. You have caused quite the disturbance to the cycle. Another rumbling laugh escaped him. I had hoped you would rid this realm of Sildraxa's corruption, but I did not expect you to be the one to burn down the great tree in the process. Nor did I expect you to regrow another in its place. Cade felt the Emperor's attention shift from him. In all my cycles, I never imagined I would witness the great tree reduced entirely to ash. Yet I am even more surprised to find a new one standing in its place. It was truly a spectacle to behold. Cade felt the Emperor's ember-lit eyes focus back on him. The old tortoise's voice was warm and friendly, but Cade couldn't tell if the Emperor was happy the great tree had finally fallen or disappointed that a new one had grown in its place. And that ashen vortex was impressive. Vorduin continued. Brahm has been insufferable ever since learning he was the youngest to forge the technique. It is refreshing to see another hatchling beat his record. Cade wasn't entirely sure how to respond to the Emperor's praise as an awkward laugh escaped his cracked lips. It's good to know that the others made it out safely, and about the great tree, well, it just sort of happened. I was just doing what I thought was right at the time. You should give yourself more credit than that, Vorduin rumbled. In all of my memories I have never seen such a display of control and resilience, especially from someone yet to form their core. It must have put quite the strain on your channels. Cade paused for a moment as his thoughts caught on to something the old tortoise had said. Wait. How do you know Sildraxa's name? Amusement faded from Vorduin's voice. Becoming Emperor has granted me more than power. Cade felt the ancient tortoise settle onto the ground next to him with a slow exhale, and he followed suit. His legs were still too wobbly to stand anyway. The Emperor's shell has granted me knowledge. Memories. Fragments from former emperors in a life long since past. Cade's pulse quickened. How much did Vorduin know now? If he knew about Sildraxa, did he know what she did to the two souls she was trapped here with? The question made him hesitate before he remembered what Vorduin had told him when they first met. If you give me no lies, you will receive no lies. Offer half-truths, and I shall answer in kind. Vorduin had always been straightforward with him. The old tortoise valued knowledge and had shared his own freely whenever asked. Cade took a slow breath and firmed his resolve. The Emperor deserved the truth. Drax's memories. Vorduin let out another rumbling chuckle. No, that name was a lie, twisted by Sildraxa's corruption. The ancestor most of the memories are from was called Ram. Ever since taking the crown I have received pieces. Scattered fragments of knowledge, experiences, and understanding. Although sorting through them has proven difficult. A dry chuckle rumbled from his chest. I suspect it will take some time before everything settles in my mind and I can sort through the truths. Cade hesitated, but Vorduin continued. Tell me what happened after you climbed into the great tree. If you know Sildraxa's name, then you must have done more than simply purge the corruption. Cade felt Vorduin's attention linger on him as he recounted the encounter within the trunk of the great tree. He left nothing out as he told of how Sildraxa had puppeted Rowana's dead body. How she had spoken about fracturing two souls in order to free them from their chains before setting them on new paths. How she had offered him guidance and tried to manipulate him and Akalian into following a path of her design. He hesitated for a moment before continuing. There was something else. I had another vision. Hold that until later, I suspect there are others who would be interested in hearing about this vision, the old tortoise grumbled. Someone else is coming. I'd be disappointed if they weren't, Vorduin said. For now, let us continue. Cade gathered his thoughts for a moment. I don't understand what Sildraxa meant by a lot of the things she said. How does someone even fracture a soul? And what were the chains she was talking about? I don't trust anything that came from her mouth, but she couldn't have made it all up on the spot. A low grumble escaped Vorduin. What Sildraxa told you is partially true. The ancient tortoise remained silent for a moment before speaking again. I possess memories from Ram's life. Memories of the same system you have spoken of in our past conversations. The words settled heavily between them. In those memories, I served a monarch named Cynthia. Cynthia? Cade questioned, as in Cynthia's legacy. Yes. Vorduan's answer came without hesitation. Cynthia was Acalian's mother. The matriarch of a once great empire. Acalian is her direct heir. Cade's thoughts stumbled over themselves as Vorduan continued. This entire realm was originally created for him. Before Sildraxa's influence corrupted this legacy, its purpose was straightforward. It existed to be a training ground. A place where Cynthia's brood would be able to learn of their heritage and provide them with a proper foundation. Unlike the generic foundation the system normally gave to natives who found themselves integrated into the multiverse. Before Cade could respond, Vorduan continued. I do not remember everything, the Emperor said. Only fragments. Flashes of a ritual gone wrong. Of a great sacrifice made to stabilize it before the system accepted Cynthia's tribute. He fell silent for a moment. Those memories remain incomplete. I am still piecing them together. Cade frowned. The explanation raised more questions than it answered. He heard Vorduan's shell scrape softly against the ground as the ancient tortoise shifted his weight. The last time we spoke, you knew nothing about dungeons. Nothing about the system. Nothing about anything beyond this realm. Cade hesitated before asking the question that had been bothering him. How do you know these memories are real? How do you know Sildraxa's corruption isn't simply feeding you false memories? A low chuckle rumbled from Vorduan's chest. You purged her influence from this realm yourself. The Emperor's voice remained calm and steady. My memories may be fragmented, but they are no less real than the memories I carry from my many cycles here. Cade felt a claw tap lightly against the orb still resting in his hand. As I said, before Sildraxa corrupted it, this realm existed to provide Cynthia's heirs with a proper foundation. The opportunity to forge a core suited to them during the system's tutorial. Vorduan paused briefly before continuing. The system grants cores to those it deems worthy, and I have little doubt Cynthia's brood would qualify. Such cores are effective. They grant power quickly and spare the recipient much hardship. Even with the tutorial, adapting to the system is difficult for most integrated sapients. A thoughtful rumble escaped Vorduan's throat. But convenience comes at a cost. A system core is not truly your own, Vorduan continued. It is a foundation chosen for you rather than by you. It provides a clear path forward, but every path has limits. The Emperor tapped the dungeon core once more. This realm was created to overcome those limits. Cade's grip tightened around the orb. How? By providing a dungeon that would allow her children to access the resources and knowledge to forge their own core. The system simplifies growth. It standardizes advancement and guides those with its cores into a path that suits them at the time of integration. For most creatures, that is more than sufficient. Cade heard Vorduan sigh deeply. But eventually every creature reaches a wall. A point where further growth demands something beyond what the system has provided. His next words were heavy with certainty. As far as my memories tell me, a system core can carry a creature to incredible heights, but every path built entirely upon one is ultimately cut short. Silence settled between them. Cade sat motionless as the implications of that statement washed over him. The system granted power. It accelerated growth. Yet according to Vorduan's recovered memories, it also imposed limits. That lined up with everything he had seen in the early days of the tutorial. Most people would be overwhelmed with unlimited choices to advance with the system, so it narrowed down the paths available to them. Cade felt his loss proud of inviolable self-pulse at the thought of the system narrowing down his own path. If he didn't want that to happen, he knew he had to form a core of his own before leaving this dungeon and going back to the tutorial. That thought raised another question in Cade's mind. How could he leave here knowing it would destabilize the dungeon? Knowing that once he destroyed the dungeon core in his hand, all of the creatures here would likely die. Cade's thoughts were interrupted again as he heard Vorduan's voice. So that old toad finally decided to show up. Heavy impacts echoed beneath Cade. Thump. 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 He felt each one grow stronger as the ground beneath him trembled. Between the size of the creature approaching and Vorduan's words, he knew Verosk, the giant golden toad second elder of the frogs, had joined them under the newly grown great tree. A deep rumble of amusement rolled from Vorduan. Verosk. It is good to see you, despite the circumstances which have brought our two tribes together once more. The old toad's voice followed a moment later. Just because you are the emperor now doesn't mean I can yet understand your garbled tongue. Cade heard a wet slush from Verosk and he immediately understood what the second elder was doing. In his mind, he pictured the massive golden toad reaching back and scraping his stringy, sickly sweet golden mucus from his own back. Cade's stomach lurched at the thought of having to consume that viscous substance again. Before he could react, a massive damp hand grabbed his jaw and tilted his head up. Cade quickly slipped free of the toad's grasp and leaned back. "I can understand you just fine, Verosk," Cade said. "No need to, waste your mucus on me." "How can I understand you?" Verosk asked, shock clear in his tone. "The effect of my mucus from when we last spoke should have worn off by now. Ever since I reforged my body during the Great Tree Trials I have been able to understand and communicate with both frogs and tortoises just fine," Cade replied as he continued to shift away from Verosk's probing hand. Silence stretched before Cade heard Vorduin grumble. "Fine, give me the mucus. If the memories are to be believed then this should be the last time I have to partake in this sick method of communication." Cade heard Vorduin take a wet slurping gulp. Verosk chuckled and turned his attention back toward Cade. "It seems the tadpole has finally grown legs. Good to see you too, second elder. Well, my eyes are kind of fucked up right now, but good to hear your voice at least. First elder now that Rowena has passed." Cade felt his chest tighten. He didn't think he'd ever see Verosk again, let alone ponder how the old toad would react to the news that Rowena was dead. But Cade sensed no animosity or anger in his tone. "Pearl has informed me that Rowena fell to the corruption plaguing this realm. With her death the title of First Elder falls to me. It is not a position I sought, but the world rarely concerns itself with our preferences." The old toad paused before continuing. "She also informed me that the chorus of frogs she left with to search for you have all perished. Ambushed by the Viscount before he was cleansed of the corruption." Cade felt his heart sink as the memory of bodies under the great tree surfaced. The blood-soaked battlefield. Limbs and cleaved sections of both tortoises and frogs scattered across the ground. "I'm sorry for your loss," Cade said. "But what do you mean they were searching for me? Pearl did not tell you?" Verosk croaked. "After the Great Tree Trials she returned to the village and begged for help in searching for you. She said that you had stayed behind to face a destroyer, giving her an opportunity to escape before she became fuel for its path. That you would try and escape the destroyer when you could and return to the village. I sent them off to look with strict guidance to stay clear of the ashen front." "Oh," Cade said quietly as he lowered his head. "I didn't know that. I ended up beating Brahm, the destroyer Pearl mentioned. Then immediately after the fight I met Vorduin here. He witnessed what happened and offered me safety and training, so I went with him." Cade frowned as regret washed over him. "If I had known Pearl would come back and look for me." Before he could finish the sentence Verosk interrupted. "What's done is done. I do not blame you, I only mourn the lives that have been lost." All three of them sat in silence for a few moments before Vorduin spoke. "Can you understand me now, First Elder?" Vorduin grumbled. "Yes, it seems my mucus has taken effect," Verosk said with a sad chuckle. "Good, then we can apprise you of the situation in which we find ourselves." Together, Cade and Vorduin brought Verosk up to speed on everything that had happened since the Great Tree Trials. Everything that mattered to the old toad at least. They told him about the corruption that had overwhelmed Akalion and how Cade was the one to cleanse the Viscount. They spoke of Rowena and the battle, of how the corruption was rooted so deeply within her that she could not be cleansed. Cade recounted his encounter with Sildraxa within the Great Tree. About how she was the one responsible for the corruption plaguing their realm. They spoke of the paths she had forced upon them, the countless ways her influence had twisted Cynthia's legacy from its original purpose, and the changes she had brought upon the realm over the many cycles. Finally, they spoke of the Great Tree's destruction and the birth of the new one through the ashes of the old. Verosk listened intently throughout, only interrupting occasionally to ask a clarifying question before falling silent once more. When they finally finished, the old toad remained quiet for several long seconds before letting out a long, weary sigh. "I suppose things could have gone worse," Verosk said. "It sounds like you did what was necessary to stop Sildraxa's influence from spreading. Although, I am surprised someone with almost no affinity for life-breathing was able to grow such a massive tree." The old toad paused thoughtfully. "And the root pillars, they feel odd." Cade shifted against the ground below him. "I sort of followed what felt right at the time," he admitted. "The old great tree reminded me too much of the ritual I saw in my vision, so I changed the root pillars." He paused, gathering his thoughts before he continued. 3 pillars instead of 8 felt right for this realm. 1 to represent the path of transformation, growth, and creation. 1 to represent the path of destruction, desolation, and purification. And 1 to represent what was in between. Cade smiled faintly as pride welled up from within. The freedom to choose your own path. Wise words, Verosk chirped. Now, what was this vision? Cade could feel both Vorduin's and Verosk's gazes bore into him. Despite their intense focus, he took a slow breath before beginning. The vision felt nearly impossible to describe, so he focused on the details he felt mattered most. He told them about the 8 colossal pillars surrounding an entity so vast that it defied comprehension. Described the impossibly powerful beings seated atop each pillar and the overwhelming pressure they radiated. He spoke of the tree dragon at the center of the formation, a creature so immense that even an entire galaxy would seem insignificant beside it. He recounted how the 8 entities had used that creature as fuel for some sort of grand ritual. Then he told both elders about the part he questioned the most. One of the entities had spoken of creating the system itself and expanding it into a new universe. Silence settled beneath the new great tree as the Ashen Emperor and the First Elder mulled over Cade's retelling of his vision. The strange mix of emotions coming from them was palpable. Confusion and unease radiated off of their massive forms and several long moments passed before Vorduin finally spoke. As far as my memories tell me, the old tortoise rumbled, I believe it is safe to assume that what you witnessed was indeed the founding of the system. Ram's memories have no recollection of the system's beginning. It simply was an ever-present part of reality. Much like the record. I am inclined to agree, Verosk croaked. I know of the record. I know that it is inherently ancient beyond anything else. But comparing it to the system from fragments of memories I inherited from Lepar, it is unclear how they differ. Cade took in a deep breath. My hypothesis is that the record existed before the system. That it was a fundamental part of that first universe. I think the ritual those 8 entities performed was meant to expand the record into the system as well as breach the barrier between universes. Verosk released a thoughtful hum. That would be a logical conclusion. Vorduin, you have held the Emperor's crown for longer than I have been First Elder. What do you recall from your past life? A low reverberation sounded through the air before Vorduin responded. The memories are still fragmented. I do recall something about the 8 pillars of the system. However, from what I can tell, Cynthia's empire preferred to remain distant from other established factions of the multiverse, so I cannot say for certain. Cade sat quietly while the implications churned through his mind. The possibility that the record had been expanded into the system. The 8 pillars. The impossible tree dragon that fueled the ritual. Sildraxos' corruption and the great tree within this realm. Eventually he voiced the question lingering in his mind. But why? Why create the system in the first place? Cade asked. If the record already existed, then why build something else on top of it? A good question. Verosk hummed. Well, I can think of one reason, but it isn't good enough to sacrifice a living entity, not in my opinion at least. Go on, Vorduin said encouragingly. I've lived with both the system and the record, Cade said. Granted, I only had access to the system for a few days before entering this dungeon, and I didn't get a system core like the others in my group. But still, I have first-hand experience with at least some of what it can do, rather than relying on fragmented memories from a past life. Unlike the record, the system provides structure. It gives people defined paths to follow and rewards them for progressing along those paths. As far as I know, everyone I was with was given a choice between several different classes and professions. Cade paused for a moment as he realized he was rambling. Maybe that's why the 8 made the system. Maybe they wanted a more structured way for people to cultivate and grow stronger than what the record provided. Through the system, I was able to gain skills without having to force essence or intent through my channels. Hell, I didn't even know what essence was until I came here. The record doesn't seem to work that way. From everything I've seen in this realm, the record only records the progress that is already made. It doesn't help or guide that progress. He frowned. Actually, this dungeon, Cynthia's legacy, might be a good example of the difference between the two. Before I entered, I received a system message saying that system access would be limited here. My race level has continued to increase and I still gain experience from killing, but the system hasn't given me any new race skill choices like it did when I reached level 5. Maybe humans only receive one race skill selection, but honestly, I doubt it. Cade rubbed his chin, feeling the patchy stubble as he contemplated his next words. Sildraxos said that she was stopping something from entering this realm, something far greater than even her. If she wasn't lying, then it is likely that the system was the thing trying to enter. That would explain why system access is limited. But we have the record, Verosk replied. Yes, but if I am correct in the record being more fundamental to reality itself, then it would make sense it exists here even if the system doesn't. That would mean the system is layered on top while the record is woven into the foundation of reality. He leaned back, allowing his cloak to harden around his form for support. Maybe the Eight created the system to help people. To make cultivation more accessible. To help more people grow stronger than they otherwise could. Cade shook his head. But what I don't understand is why they needed to sacrifice something as immense as the tree dragon to do so. Essence and laws, Vorduin answered immediately. Veros hummed in agreement. To expand the record into an entirely new universe would require unfathomable power. Ram was stronger than anything I have witnessed in my many cycles. Yet even his power would have been insignificant compared to what would be required to truly understand the record, let alone expand it. Cade furrowed his brow. Pain surged around his damaged eyes. Is there a way to repair the memories both of you inherited? He asked. If you could fully remember your past lives, and those lives existed within the system, then we wouldn't have to play this guessing game. The same is true for my own memories. Some surface quickly while others remain buried in a haze of ash. I suspect it will be many cycles before either of us fully understands everything we inherited. Their words brought another memory to the forefront of Cade's mind. Sildraxaw said she had fractured the two souls that were trapped with her in this realm. At the time she had framed it as liberation from the chains that bound them. Cade wasn't sure whether any of that had been true. In the memories both of you inherited, Cade asked, do either of you remember Sildraxaw fracturing your ancestors' souls? No, Vorduin muttered after a moment of thought. But it would not surprise me if she did. We tortoises have always felt a connection to one another. As though we have always belonged to the same shell. We frogs have always been but notes harmonizing with one song, Veros chirped. The sly amusement in the old toad's voice earned a chuckle from Cade. So if Sildraxaw really did fracture the souls of your ancestors, Cade said slowly, wouldn't that mean that every frog and every tortoise holds a piece of those original souls? Both elders remained silent, content to let Cade work through his thoughts. What if you absorbed those fragments? He continued. Would that help restore the memories you inherited? It might, Vorduin said with a bit of hesitation. I am no expert on souls, but it is likely that I would need to consume every other tortoise in this realm. Their essence, their souls, everything that makes them unique. The old tortoise's voice firmed. That is not a sacrifice I am willing to make. Veros hummed in agreement. I will not end the songs of my kin. Even if we were fragments of a greater being, we are not that anymore. I have no desire to reform what Lepar once was, especially at the cost of every other frog's life. Cade frowned. But they wouldn't truly die, would they? He asked. If you all came from a single soul, then wouldn't it just be like fitting puzzle pieces back together? Both elders were quiet for a moment. You may be right, Veros said. There is great beauty in the whole song, but there is also great value in each individual note. Those words struck a chord within Cade. Veros had a point. Even if the frogs had once belonged to a single soul, they were now separate entities. The fragments had become individuals. They possessed their own thoughts, hopes, and dreams. Pearl was not the same as Esmeralda. Brahm was not the same as Vorduin. The fragments of soul scattered through Cynthia's legacy were not just puzzle pieces waiting to be reassembled. Reforging the fractured soul might restore whatever Sildraxaw had done to them, but it would also erase everything that had grown from what remained. The realization left Cade conflicted. His head felt heavy and his thoughts muddled. Everything they had discussed felt impossibly large. Insanely powerful cosmic entities, the system's creation, repairing the damage Sildraxaw had unleashed upon this realm. It was just too much. Too far beyond anything he could do. And even if he could, he wasn't even sure if Vorduin or Veros even wanted help. He took a deep breath. Then another as he forced his mind to let go of the overwhelming scope of everything they had talked about thus far. He needed to focus on what actually mattered. The mysteries surrounding the system, the record, and the fragmented memories inherited by the two elders were important, but none of them required an answer right now. Those questions could wait until Veros and Vorduin had a better understanding of their memories and Cade wasn't on the verge of collapsing from exhaustion. So what mattered in this moment? Cade absent-mindedly rolled the dungeon core between his fingers as he thought. The smooth round orb slid easily within his grasp, cool and far more dense than he would have thought. If he were truly honest with himself, the only thing he wanted right now was to rest. To sleep in a comfortable bed and not think about fractured souls, corruption, or cosmic entities more powerful than he could even imagine. Unfortunately, that wasn't possible. So he moved on to the next thing he wanted. He wanted to leave this dungeon. He wanted to return to the tutorial, survive whatever hell awaited him there, and then find his family. But before any of that could happen, he needed to form his core. If he left Cynthia's legacy without one, the system might force a system core into him. His body was now far beyond that of a normal human. For all he knew, that was more than enough to qualify for a system core. His law sprout of inviolable self pulsed deep within his soul at the thought of the system limiting his path. Cade grimaced as the sprout agitated his injured soul. There was another reason he couldn't leave yet. Another problem that would haunt him if he did. If he left, then what would happen to everyone here? Would the frogs and the tortoises just die when the dungeon collapsed? And what about the new great tree? Would the piece of his soul woven into its roots vanish alongside them? His fingers tightened around the orb. He had yet to tell either elder about what he was holding. Slowly, Cade lifted his hand and held up the dungeon core. Do either of you know what this is? Silence followed before both elders replied in the negative. Cade nodded. This is the dungeon's core. The core to Cynthia's legacy. I found it deep underground while regrowing the great tree. When I picked it up, I received a system message. What did the message say? Verosk asked. It said that if I destroy the core, I'll be returned to the tutorial. But if that happens, the realm connected to the core will collapse, Vorduin finished. The old tortoise's words carried such certainty that Cade was stunned. Did he know that from the inherited memories? Or was it ingrained into them as denizens of Cynthia's legacy? This realm was never intended to last forever, the first elder croaked. I know that now. Its purpose was to aid Cynthia's brood. To teach Acalion the ways of Cynthia's empire and guide him toward core formation. Sildraxa may have warped it with her corruption, but we will still fulfill our duty. A deep rumble of agreement escaped Vorduin's chest. Cade tried to hide how much Verosk's words bothered him, but he wasn't entirely successful. So you're really okay with dying once Acalion forms his core? Cade asked, exhaustion and disbelief bleeding into his voice. With every other tortoise and frog dying with you? You won't gather the fractured pieces of your ancestors' soul because doing so would erase who they are, but you'll let them all die for some strange sense of duty? All to help one gator get a leg up in the 111th universe. Our progenitors already sacrificed their lives to stabilize the ritual. As their fragments, it is our duty to ensure the Viscount succeeds. Vorduin muttered. But Cade wasn't convinced Vorduin truly believed those words. The old tortoise's voice lacked the iron conviction it had carried only moments earlier. No. There had to be another way. His mind felt sluggish. Every point in their conversation seemed to spawn more questions, and every question only increased the scope of what he was dealing with. He needed time to think. Time to rest and recover. Time to process everything he had learned. With a weary sigh, Cade tightened his grip on the dungeon core, careful not to squeeze too hard. He wasn't sure how durable the orb was, and accidentally destroying it would likely doom everyone except for him. For several moments he sat in silence, willing his thoughts to clear before finally speaking again. Okay, Cade said, exhaustion clear in his voice. I feel like we've spent way too long talking about things I can't truly comprehend. It's too much for me right now. Maybe after some sleep we can reconvene and discuss more, but for now I'm done. To his surprise, Vorduin responded to his declaration with a roar of laughter. You have just barely scratched the surface, hatchling. The old tortoise continued laughing for several moments before Verosk cleared his throat in obvious disapproval, prompting Vorduin to regain his composure. I understand. Burning the great tree and growing a replacement has no doubt put your channels and mine through great strain. Get some rest. We can continue this discussion once you have recovered. Yes, Verosk chirped in agreement. You rest. We will be here when you wake. The gold toad paused for a moment before continuing. Besides, we need to instruct Acalion on core formation. Despite his exhaustion, Cade immediately sat up as the first elder's words scraped at the dregs of his attention. He already knew the basics of core formation thanks to Vorduin, but the basics would only take him so far. He needed to understand the entire process. Sildraxa had warned that normal core formation would not work for him. Cade didn't trust a word she said, yet he wasn't about to dismiss the slight possibility that she wasn't lying. If he was going to forge a core suited to his unique circumstances, then he first needed to know every detail of how a core was normally formed. Okay, Cade said. I need to know how to form a core as well. If you're going to teach Acalion, then I'll try and push through to listen. No, Vorduan's deep voice carried the authority of an emperor in that simple statement. You will rest first. Cade opened his mouth to argue, but the Ashen Emperor didn't let him. Verosk and I are not going anywhere. Even if this realm will collapse after Akalian forms his core, our tribes still have much to discuss. We will instruct you both when you are rested. Cade wanted to argue, to try and push through his exhaustion. But his body ached and his channels throbbed. The dozens of stabbing pains scattered throughout his body had not lessened at all during their conversation, and his soul still stung where he ripped out a root of his law sprout. He hadn't told either elder about that yet, but it wasn't something he was intentionally hiding. The subject just hadn't come up. Besides, Vorduan had explained that laws were deeply personal and rarely, if ever, discussed with others. Fine, Cade muttered as he laid flat on the ground. The dungeon core remained clutched in his hand. Exhaustion finally won and Cade felt his consciousness slip away, guiding him into the deepest sleep he had experienced since before the tutorial. The first thing Cade became aware of was the cool air as it brushed against his skin. Sound came to him next as leaves rustled softly somewhere overhead. The sensations drifted in and out of his awareness as he slowly came back to consciousness. For several moments he remained still. His thoughts still felt sluggish. A lingering soreness settled into his muscles while a dull ache seemed to permeate every part of him. His channels felt surprisingly stable, even if they were drained of all essence. The overwhelming strain he felt before he passed out was gone. The raw burning sensation that had accompanied every movement had faded. Even so, dozens of smaller pains remained scattered throughout his body. The sharp, stabbing sensations had dulled considerably, but they had not disappeared entirely. It felt as though invisible threads still lingered beneath his skin, buried deep within flesh, pulling his channels taut. A smooth, round object weighed against his palm. His fingers reflexively tightened around the cool sphere. Somehow, he was still holding the dungeon core. Why hadn't Vorduan or Verosk taken it while he slept? Crushing this small orb would destroy the realm and likely kill every creature within. It had to be the most dangerous object within the legacy, yet neither elder had attempted to take it from him. Did they really trust him that much? Cade pushed those thoughts aside for the moment and pulled up his status window, limiting the information to only show his resources. HP, 706/1210. SP, 309/902. MP, 1055/1254. Before passing out, he had been nearly empty of all three. Yet his condition had improved drastically after sleeping. More than half of his health had returned and nearly all of his mana had recovered. His stamina lagged behind the other two, but he chalked that up to the fact that he passed out on the hard ground. The improvement was substantial, far more than he would have expected from a night's rest. Wait, how long did I sleep? He had no way of knowing, but judging by how much he had recovered, he suspected he had been unconscious for quite some time. Cade slowly cracked his eyes open and the world greeted him as a blur. Shapes and colors bled together without clear definition. It was far better than before, but he still couldn't see properly. The familiar flashes of multicolored lightning were still present behind his eyes. Thin arcs occasionally streaked across his vision before fading away a heartbeat later. Annoying as they were, Cade took their continued presence as a sign that whatever the rhizome was doing to repair his eyes was still ongoing. Hopefully his sight would recover soon. As he slowly lifted his head, several indistinct figures came into view in the far distance. Their forms shifted through the haze, little more than silhouettes against a blurred landscape. Cade blinked several times in an attempt to focus before giving up. He lowered his head back down and turned his gaze upward. The small amount of relief he felt at his improving vision immediately vanished. Darkness consumed a large portion of his view overhead. This was not a blur in the grey haze of his damaged eyesight. No, this was pure, absolute black. He could feel that there was something enormous directly above him, swallowing every trace of light. What the hell is that? Confusion stirred within him, and after several seconds of failing to understand what he was seeing, he reached a hand towards the darkness only for his fingers to brush against nothing but air. Cade. A familiar voice cut through his confusion. He turned toward the sound and spotted a blurry shape approaching through the haze. Pearl. You're finally awake. Relief filled her voice, though something about her tone seemed different. How long have I been out? And where are Vorduan and Verosk? 2 days. They're with Akalian. Pearl replied without hesitation. 2 days. Why didn't anyone wake me up? You needed to recover. We were told to let you sleep until you woke on your own. Well, I'm fine now, can you take me to them? Of course. Pearl moved closer and Cade slowly pushed himself to his feet. After steadying himself for a moment, he followed the blurry silhouette as she began leading him away from where he had passed out. As they walked, Cade found himself stealing occasional glances toward Pearl's blurry silhouette. Something about the way she carried herself felt off. The easy familiarity she had once used with him was gone. Instead, there was a careful restraint in both her words and movements that reminded him of how she behaved around Verosk. I never thought I would see something like this. See what? My kin sharing space with the destroyers. Disbelief rang clear in her voice. I always thought of them as mindless monsters. Creatures that emerged from the ash to burn everything we built. I understood they were a part of the greater cycle. Pearl paused for a moment before continuing. But now, it feels different. Different how? The desolation is still there. I can feel it whenever they are near. But ever since the great tree's rebirth, it isn't nearly as overwhelming as before. The aura they emit feels calmer. Cade wasn't entirely sure what to make of that, but before he could ask another question, the indistinct shapes ahead began to resolve into a larger cluster of blurry figures. Several broad forms rested together while a handful of smaller silhouettes stood around them. Pearl slowed. We're here. Cade immediately recognized the deep rumble of Vorduan's laughter. Look who is finally awake. The amusement in the old tortoise's voice was unmistakable. Cade felt numerous presences turn their attention toward him as he heard a feeble old croak whisper into the air. When this skin and bone tadpole limped onto my pad weeks ago, I would have never expected him to burn down the great tree, let alone grow another in its place. The old frog let out a thoughtful croak. Tell me, youngling. For one with no affinity for life-breathing, how exactly did you accomplish such a feat? Cade frowned for a moment before finally recognizing Esmeralda's voice. He hadn't expected her to be here. Part of him hoped she wouldn't be the one responsible for teaching him how to form a core before Vorduan's voice cut through his thoughts. We do not need to waste time indulging Esmeralda's curiosity. She may catch up on her own. Rumbled Vorduan as his attention shifted towards Cade. While you slept, Verosk and I began teaching Akalian about core formation. Now that you are up, it is time for you to learn as well. Cade immediately perked up. After who knows how long he had spent in Cynthia's legacy, he was finally going to learn how to form a core. Sit, Vorduan instructed. Cade did as he was told, lowering himself onto the ground while carefully keeping hold of the dungeon core. The Emperor waited until he settled before speaking again. I have already explained the basics to you before. Forming a core requires gathering a tremendous quantity of essence and condensing it within your abdomen until it solidifies. The more essence one can gather, contain, and control during the process, the stronger the resulting core will be. The ancient tortoise shifted slightly. When ash tortoise hatchlings form their first core, many spend days gathering essence as they burn the frog's swamps. Some spend weeks gathering enough. Cade frowned. Weeks? But how do they keep gathering essence over multiple days if they have to continually spend it to fuel the flames of desolation? A low chuckle escaped from the Ashen Emperor. That is why the youngest among the Ashen Front move ahead of those more advanced in their cultivation. Their flames may not be as efficient, but consuming unburnt growth will return more essence than what it costs to burn. Vorduan continued before Cade could interrupt. As a hatchling gathers essence, they siphon off portions and begin condensing it within themselves. The old tortoise's voice remained calm and patient. You already know how we create the flames of desolation. Cade nodded. Core formation follows a similar principle. A hatchling siphons a portion of the essence circulating through their channels, and instead of directing it into their chest to form the sphere, they direct it into the abdomen. As more pure essence is gathered, more essence will be added to the growing core within. Every additional wisp of essence makes the core stronger, Vorduan said. It also makes failure more costly. The hatchling must maintain complete control throughout the process. The sphere grows denser as additional essence is compressed into it. They cannot lose concentration lest the sphere destabilize. Cade frowned. What happens if the essence destabilizes? The compressed essence erupts back through their channels, and if enough has been condensed, the resulting backlash can be fatal. Cade's expression immediately tightened. Oh. It has been many cycles since a hatchling was unfortunate enough for that to happen. It is a rare occurrence, as most would rather condense a lesser core than reach for perfection and perish in the process. When sufficient essence has been condensed and compressed, the sphere eventually stabilizes and solidifies into a core. Cade nodded slowly. That's basically what you told me last time. A low rumble escaped Vorduhan. Yes, but forming a core is merely the first step. Cade's brow furrowed. What do you mean? I thought all you had to do was form the core. A newly formed core is useless. That statement immediately caught Cade off guard. What? Just because the core exists, Vorduhan explained, does not mean one can draw upon it. In order to actually use a core, both the physical and metaphysical channels must be connected to it. Only then can essence circulate properly between the core, the body, the spirit, and the soul. A long silence followed before Vorduhan continued. Many hatchlings believe forming the core is the difficult part. They quickly learn otherwise. Connecting the channels is often the greater challenge. Additional connections can be forged later, but it is wisest to establish as many as possible while the core is still malleable. The old tortoise seemed content to let the silence linger, so Cade considered his words before asking the obvious question. How do you connect your channels to the core? A fair question, the Emperor grumbled. Before a hatchling can connect their channels to a newly formed core, they must first know their own body. They must know their channels. Where they begin, flow, and ultimately terminate. Only once they know their channels, Vorduhan continued, can they consciously guide them to the core. The old tortoise paused for a moment. Unlike the frogs, we tortoises consider the physical connections to be the easiest as we possess a natural affinity toward physical cultivation. Each hatchling learns to sense and manipulate their physical channels long before they consciously control their metaphysical ones. Vorduhan let out a thoughtful rumble. Even so, the process varies from one individual to another. Some hatchlings form their core and spend days connecting their channels while others accomplish it almost effortlessly. The old tortoise chuckled. Take Brahm, for example. He formed his core and his channels connected to it so naturally that one would think they had been waiting for it all along. The unmistakable fondness in Vorduhan's voice was impossible to miss. Cade wasn't remotely surprised. Brahm may be a conceited ass, but he was exceptionally gifted, especially considering his age. So it just depends on the individual. Correct. Cade nodded. So all I need to do is gather a ridiculous amount of essence, start condensing it, and then connect my channels to the core. Sounds easy enough. Vorduhan laughed and Cade heard a chorus of amused frog croaks ring out around him. There is still one final step, boomed Vorduhan's voice. Cade's enthusiasm immediately dimmed. After the physical and metaphysical channels have been connected to the core, the cultivator must send essence through both simultaneously. This will then solidify the connection between the core and the soul. Why does the core need to connect to the soul? Cade asked. No matter the method used to form it, every core ultimately serves the same purpose. Vorduhan's voice grew more serious. It unites the physical, metaphysical, and the soul. Hold on. Vorduhan stopped. Before we get into that, what exactly do you mean by metaphysical? I know we've talked about it before and I've even seen it mentioned in my system screens, but I've never actually stopped and thought about what it means. Most living creatures are composed of 3 parts, Vorduhan said. The physical body. Cade heard a claw scrape lightly against the ground. The metaphysical body. Another scrape. And the soul. The metaphysical body is also called the spirit body. It is the aspect of yourself most often used to influence the world beyond your flesh. Cade listened intently. The flames of desolation are primarily fueled through the metaphysical channels. The spirit carries essence and transforms it into desolation. Vorduhan shifted slightly. Meanwhile, our muscles, bones, organs, and shell are strengthened through our physical channels. Vorduhan's words made something click inside Cade's head. Stamina and mana. The realization was almost embarrassingly simple. The physical channels carried what the system recognized as stamina while the metaphysical channels carried mana. They were different names for the same thing. Well, not exactly the same thing, but close. He was fairly certain there were more differences between pure essence, stamina, and mana than simply which channels they flowed through. Some sort of transformation had to happen somewhere in the process, otherwise his status sheet would just say essence in place of stamina and mana. I think I understand, Cade said slowly. But why are both physical and metaphysical channels connected through the core and into the soul? A thoughtful silence followed before Vorduhan asked a question of his own. Where do you think essence comes from? The question caught Cade off guard. For several moments, he turned it over in his mind in silence. Where did essence come from? Vorduin had once described essence as the fundamental building block of reality itself. Everything around them was ultimately composed of it. The ash that the tortoises left behind was stabilized pure essence. Every plant and creature he had encountered was ultimately a collection of life essence. He had to assume that even things such as the air and water were made of essence. Essence was the foundation of reality, but where did that foundation come from? His thoughts drifted back through everything they had discussed since he woke. The physical body and the metaphysical body. These two contained channels where essence flowed. Then there was the soul. The core connected each of these three, but why? If the physical and metaphysical were where the essence flowed, then was the soul where essence was generated? The soul. The words came more as a question than an answer. Does essence come from the soul? A deep rumble echoed from Vorduin. Very good. All essence originates from the soul, the emperor continued. The soul is the wellspring from which all essence flows. From there, will, intent, and the laws refine that essence into the countless forms reality may assume. The old tortoise paused, allowing the statement to settle before continuing. Life essence gives rise to living flesh. Our flames destabilize life essence and organic matter, breaking down the essence within into pure essence. But there are other forms of essence as well. Water essence becomes rivers and rain. Fire essence manifests as heat and flame. Earth essence hardens into stone. So all of reality, everything that has ever existed, has been created through essence from the soul of one being or another. Cade asked. Yes, Vorduin replied simply. Cade hesitated for a moment before asking his next question. How does essence exist before someone forms a core? If a core is what is required to connect to the soul, how can essence exist and form reality in the first place? Silence followed before a different voice entered the discussion. That, Veros croaked, is where you have made a false assumption. A core does not create the connection between the individual and their soul. It strengthens the connection already present. Veros continued before Cade could interrupt. Every living creature possesses a soul. As soon as they come into being, that creature is connected to that soul. When exactly that happens is up for debate and not important for this discussion. Cade felt the old toad's gaze shift towards him. What is important is to know that while the connection is present, without a core it is weak. Faint. Almost imperceptible. But it is still there nonetheless. We have wandered from the original lesson. The Emperor's voice once again became measured and instructional. The core establishes a stable bridge between the physical, metaphysical, and the soul. But it also creates a reservoir for essence. Cade listened intently. The core is a reservoir for essence as well as a point of connection between the layers of reality that compose your existence. The old tortoise shifted slightly. The stronger the core, the stronger that connection becomes. And the stronger that connection, the more essence one may draw from the soul at a given moment. Understanding slowly dawned on Cade. So the stronger the core, the more essence can cross that bridge at once. I would also assume the stronger the core, the more essence can be pooled within that reservoir. Another approving rumble escaped Vorduin. Precisely. But the amount of essence alone is not everything. The purity of the core determines how much strain is placed upon the soul as essence is drawn from it. The old tortoise allowed that statement to linger before continuing. A crude core may draw the same quantity of essence as a stronger one, but doing so will place more burden upon the soul and it will take longer to recover. The purer the core, the smoother the bridge between the soul and the body becomes. Silence settled over the group before Vorduin spoke again. This discussion has gone beyond the fundamentals. Just know that when first creating your core, you should aim to make the highest quality with the essence you have gathered. It is possible to work on and even upgrade your core once it is formed. However, it is much more difficult as it requires both vast amounts of essence as well as intimate knowledge and understanding of both your core and your channels. Cade felt another low chuckle rumble from deep within the Emperor's shell. If you choose to walk our path, I will gladly guide you through the intricacies of both the formation of your core and the process of connecting it. Cade frowned. What do you mean if I choose? Isn't forming a core the same for everyone? Before Vorduin could answer, an old croak interrupted. Verosk's voice carried an unusual calm certainty. No, there are as many methods to form a core as there are paths. And because you are neither frog nor tortoise, you have the option of following either of our paths to form your core. A softer croak sounded nearby. I'm not convinced the human could even form a core using our method, Esmeralda muttered. Verosk let out a sigh. Perhaps. But he should understand both before making such a decision. There are multiple ways to form a core. Cade asked. I guess that makes sense. I'm sure the system has its own method of giving people a system core that is probably separate from what Vorduhun has said. A slow chuckle escaped Verosk. Each method to form a core shapes the path that follows. While the method Vorduhun has suggested is efficient in that it forms a core quickly, it is not suitable for those of us that walk a path that does not gain from killing or destruction. Several amused croaks sounded throughout the gathering. Our method for core formation may take longer than that of the tortoises, but it also produces a core that is truly one's own. It is born entirely from the cultivator's soul rather than being supplemented by essence gathered through desolation. An ash tortoise to Cade's right snorted but did not interrupt further. How are the two methods actually different? Cade asked. Verosk paused briefly before answering. The difference begins with where the essence comes from. The tortoises gather essence from the world around them. They consume, refine, and condense pure essence into a core. A slow croak escaped from the giant golden toad. We do not. Frogs gather only the essence already within themselves. You don't use any external essence at all to form the core? Cade asked. None unless it is freely offered, and even then most will refuse, as taking in foreign essence during core formation will only muddy one's own essence. Okay, but how do you get the essence to form the core in the first place? We draw directly from the soul. How? The question escaped Cade's mouth almost immediately. I thought you needed a core to make a proper connection to your soul. Verosk answered before Cade could continue. You do not. The soul is already connected to the metaphysical body. Albeit a weak connection, but a connection nonetheless. Every living thing is connected to its soul in one way or another. However, the connection is too faint to draw large quantities of essence. That is why our method requires time. A great deal of time. The old frog shifted before continuing. When a frog is ready to form their core, they begin by entering a deep meditation. They quiet both body and mind and learn to sense the faint thread connecting their spirit to the soul. His voice softened. Then, they wait and coax the essence to flow, guiding it from the soul and into the metaphysical channels where the essence can build. A single wisp begins the process. Then another. And another. The elder frog remained silent for a moment before continuing. Day after day they sit in silent meditation as essence gently flows from the soul. In many cases weeks can pass by without much progress. The metaphysical channels slowly fill as more essence is gathered. Cade tried picturing the process. Simply sitting motionless while patiently drawing essence from one's own soul. It sounded incredibly slow and boring, but he did have hyper-focused meditation. Losing track of time while waiting for essence from his soul might not be an issue with that skill active. It requires unwavering concentration, Verosk continued. There is no rushing the process. I spent nearly an entire cycle gathering enough essence to form my own core. Cade's brow furrowed. An entire cycle. The old frog's voice now had a slight hint of embarrassment. I was not particularly gifted at the beginning of my journey, but even still, I have come far from where I first began. Verosk continued. When sufficient essence has finally accumulated within one's metaphysical channels, it may be guided and condensed. Stabilized and solidified into a core in the center of one's being. Cade nodded slowly. So you form your core using only essence from your own soul. Then afterwards you connect your channels. Only the physical ones. Verosk corrected. Our metaphysical channels are already intertwined with the core as they carry every strand of essence used to create it. We need only to establish the physical pathways. So the overall process is similar, and choosing between the two is really just a choice between if I want to manually connect my physical or metaphysical channels to the core. Since the tortoises gather and manipulate essence mostly through their physical channels, they struggle with making the metaphysical connections, while the frogs have the opposite problem. Once both sets of channels are connected, Verosk continued, the cultivator sends a pulse of essence through the entire network. The golden toad's voice grew more solemn. The physical, the metaphysical, and the soul then become one complete system, with the core linking the three together. Silence settled over the clearing as Verosk finished the explanation. Cade let out a slow breath. His mind felt like it was overflowing and he needed a moment to organize everything. Neither elder spoke and he heard only a few murmurs from the others gathered around. Eventually Cade exhaled again. All right. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. Let me see if I've actually understood everything the two of you just explained. Essence is the fundamental building block of reality, and it originates from the soul. Will, intent, and the laws shape that essence into everything else. He gestured vaguely toward the world around them. life, fire, water, lightning, everything. A low rumble came from Vorduhan. Verosk answered with a quiet croak. A simplistic explanation. The Emperor nodded. But an accurate one. Cade took in a slow breath and continued. So every living creature has a soul. And since essence comes from the soul, every living creature is capable of changing reality. A low rumble escaped Vorduhan. Not entirely. Verosk croaked in turn. The amount of essence a creature may express depends upon two things. The strength of the soul itself and the strength of one's connection to their soul. A mighty soul connected through a poor core is like a vast river forced through a narrow crack. The potential exists, but little of it may be expressed. Vorduhan's gravelly voice chimed in. Likewise, a perfect connection to a weak soul still yields little as the soul has little to give. The old tortoise chuckled. The conduit may be flawless, but that does not matter if there is little essence to flow through. So that's why creatures with cores are generally stronger. The core deepens the connection to the soul. It allows greater quantities of essence to flow from the soul with less resistance. Precisely, Verosk said. Once the core is formed and the connection is made, that essence can then be drawn upon to fuel techniques such as our mist weaving or life breathing. Our flames of desolation are no exception. Vorduhan grumbled out. You have been using essence gathered from outside yourself to fuel your flames. Once you form a core you will be able to fuel them using essence from your own soul. Silence settled once more. Cade slowly exhaled. Okay. He absent-mindedly fidgeted with his hands. That all makes sense. But honestly, he couldn't help the small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It sounds like the two of you are basically doing the same thing. A loud scoff escaped Verosk. At almost the same instant, Vorduhan let out a deep, rumbling chuckle. The methods are hardly the same, Vorduhan said. They are remarkably different, Verosk replied at nearly the same time. Cade raised both hands. I didn't say they were identical, but in the broadest sense both methods of core formation still accomplish the same goal. He counted on his fingers. They use essence to form a core and they connect the physical body, metaphysical body, and the soul. He shrugged. The order for which channels connect is different. Where the essence comes from is different. But the destination seems the same. Neither elder argued and eventually, Vorduhan spoke. That is, a fair assessment. From a sufficient distance, they are similar. Verosk added. Cade smiled. I'll take it. The old frog let out an amused croak before his voice grew more serious. But do not mistake similar destinations for identical paths. The method by which a core is formed shapes the core itself. It establishes the foundation upon which everything else is built. Vorduhan picked up the explanation. A weak foundation limits what may be built upon it. The old tortoise's voice now carried the same certainty Cade had come to expect from the Emperor. A strong core creates possibilities. The choices made during core formation echo throughout the remainder of one's path. The techniques that come naturally. The way essence flows. The burdens the soul may bear. The core is not simply another organ. It is the first true expression of the path you walk. Cade lowered his head and his fingers tightened around the smooth dungeon core still resting in his palm. His thoughts slowed. Why did he even need to form his own core? Why spend weeks coaxing essence from his soul? Why burn down the jungle to harvest enough pure essence to condense a core when he had a perfectly good one right here in the palm of his hand? A core that had been refined over countless cycles by an entity far beyond him. One that contained an immense reservoir of essence and had already served as the foundation for both paths he now walked. Sildraxa had claimed that forming a core naturally will be much harder for him. That he'd need a core aligned to his path. What was more aligned to his journey than the core he currently held? Cade rolled the smooth dungeon core between his fingers. An idea had been gnawing at the back of his mind ever since Vorduhan began explaining what a core actually was. The more the two elders talked, the harder it became to ignore. Can I ask another question? A low rumble answered. You have not stopped asking them since you awoke. Several amused croaks echoed around him but Cade ignored them. In your memories. He hesitated, trying to phrase the question properly. Have either of you ever heard of someone using a core they didn't make themselves? What do you mean? Verosk asked. Cade gripped the sphere in his hand. When I killed the lords of the swamp, I was able to carve their cores out of their corpses. I didn't have a use for them back then, but if I still had one of those cores, could I have used it as the foundation for my own? connected my channels to it instead of forming an entirely new core. An eerie silence settled over the gathering. Eventually Vorduhan let out a thoughtful rumble. That sounds familiar. I remember techniques involving another's core, but I cannot recall their exact purpose. Whether they involved replacing one's own core with another, consuming another to increase your own strength, or something else entirely, I couldn't say. His voice carried a rare hint of frustration. The memories remain incomplete. As I have said before, it will take time for them to fully reform. Cade felt Verosk shift nearby. I have never heard of such a thing. The Elder Frog's answer came without hesitation. A core is the culmination of one's cultivation as they take their first step. It has always seemed self-evident that it should be forged by the cultivator who intends to use it. Why do you ask? Cade's fingers unconsciously tightened around the dungeon core. Should he tell them? Everything in this realm. Every frog. Every tortoise. Every patch of swamp filled with seemingly endless life. Every grain of ash in the desolate wastes. All of it ultimately depended upon the small sphere resting in his palm. This legacy existed for one purpose. To prepare Acalion for his role in whatever Cynthia had planned for him, not to become a stepping stone for some human from the tutorial. Maybe this was one thought he should keep to himself. Another memory surfaced at the back of his mind. If you give me no lies, you will receive no lies. Offer half-truths, and I shall answer in kind. Cade slowly exhaled. Vorduhan had never hidden knowledge from him. The old tortoise had answered every question honestly. He deserved the same courtesy. I think. Cade began slowly. I could combine both of your methods. I could gather pure essence from the frog swamps using my flames of desolation. Then I could use essence manipulation to condense that essence while meditating and slowly drawing more from my own soul. The idea became clearer as he spoke it aloud. Doing so would combine both methods of core formation. The core would be built using both the destruction I've embraced from the ash tortoises and the growth and transformation I've gained from the frogs and the great tree. It would reflect the path I've actually walked since entering Cynthia's legacy. Verosk let out a quiet croak. If you believe such a method suits you, then why not simply do that? Cade clenched the dungeon core in his hand. Because it doesn't feel right. Don't get me wrong, I'm fairly certain it would work. It would solve my problem of not having a core. By the time I finished forming it, Acalion would probably have formed his as well. A faint smile crossed Cade's face. We'd be able to leave the legacy together. His expression slowly faded. And then everyone here would die. The words hung heavily in the air. With us destroying the dungeon core to leave and go back to the tutorial, this realm would collapse. Despite his ruined vision, Cade looked between the indistinct shapes of the frogs and tortoises gathered around him. Everything you've built, everyone standing here, would be gone the moment we leave. A deep rumble echoed from Vorduhan. That is why this legacy exists. There wasn't the slightest hesitation in the Emperor's voice. It was created so the Viscount might receive the strongest possible beginning. If fulfilling that purpose demands our deaths, then we accept them gladly. Cade's grip tightened. No. That's not good enough. Every creature around fell silent at his words, and for several long moments, no one spoke. When Vorduhan finally answered, there was only certainty in his voice. It is not your burden to bear. This legacy was created with a single purpose. To prepare the Viscount. Now that Sildraxxa's corruption has been purged, that purpose can finally be fulfilled. Verosk croaked in agreement. Our lives have always been borrowed. They were never truly ours in the first place. Each elder has lived countless cycles knowing how this realm would end. None of our deaths rest upon your shoulders. You owe us nothing, and there is nothing you can do to change this fate. Several frogs and tortoises murmured their agreement with their elders' proclamations. You should concern yourself only with gaining everything this legacy can offer before you and the Viscount depart. Cade slowly shook his head, his fingers tightening even further around the smooth dungeon core. No. The single word silenced the murmurs. Everyone except Acalion and me dying is not an acceptable solution. The two of you talk about purpose. You speak as though every creature here exists only because Cynthia needed teachers for her son. His gaze drifted across the assembled frogs and tortoises. But that's not what I see. Despite his damaged vision, he recognized the blurry figures of Pearl, Braum, and Esmeralda as well as countless others he didn't recognize. I see individuals. Individuals who may have begun as fragments of two original souls, but they've become far more than that. Vorduhan's voice hardened and his words rolled across Cade like thunder. No. The individual matters little. The legacy matters. The Viscount matters. Our purpose matters. If every creature within this realm must perish so that Acalion may begin his path with the strongest possible foundation. The Emperor's voice quivered despite his conviction. Then those deaths are insignificant. Cade frowned. He didn't believe Vorduin truly meant those words. They sounded too practiced, too ingrained. An ancient belief carried forward by every emperor since Sildraxa had fractured the original soul countless cycles ago. Something to cling to as the legacy repeated its cycle over and over while its denizens waited for Acalion to finally appear. There was no way the emperor truly believed their lives meant nothing. Cade scoffed. I think you're wrong. Those two outcomes aren't mutually exclusive. I think Acalion can take all the time he needs to forge the strongest core possible. And I think everyone here can survive when he finally leaves. Cade kept talking, hoping neither elder would interrupt him. You both said the same thing. The core is the foundation. The first true step on one's path. He slowly rose to his feet. His sore muscles protested, but he ignored them. When I entered Cynthia's legacy I was nothing. The system didn't even think I was worth giving a core. I was just a coreless nobody. He thought back to his old life. Back to the tutorial. Back to his old colleagues who had stood above him, looking down from their positions of gifted power. I won a few fights. I survived by the skin of my teeth. But compared to everyone else. He let out a slow breath. I wasn't even playing the same game. The dungeon core felt heavier in his hand. Everything changed here. The storm sap crucible reforged my body. I discovered my laws here. I gained the primordial heartwood rhizome here. I learned to wield the flames of desolation here. He glanced upward toward the unseen canopy above. I purged Sildraxa's corruption from this realm. I burned down the great tree, then grew another in its place. His grip tightened around the core until his knuckles whitened. Every meaningful step I've taken toward becoming stronger, towards becoming who I am today, has started here. His voice grew more confident. So tell me, why would I build the foundation of my path from essence alone? The question lingered in the still air. I think, Cade said slowly. My core should be built upon the very heart of the place that helped transform me into who I am now. His grip tightened around the dungeon core. And if I'm right? He took a slow breath. Then maybe I don't have to choose between going back to the tutorial and all of you. Maybe this realm doesn't have to die just because Acalion and I have to leave one day. Cade closed his eyes and the primordial heartwood rhizome stirred within him. A slow breath escaped his lips as he gathered his thoughts and let his intent flow into the rhizome. Immediately the roots woven throughout his body responded to his will. A strange writhing sensation spread beneath the skin just below his navel. Several voices immediately rose around him. Cade. What are you doing? What do you mean? He ignored them as he focused on the roots slowly creeping out of his abdomen. Dozens of thin tendrils separated from the central rhizome, weaving themselves through muscle before gently pressing against the inside of his skin. Pain lanced through him, but it was nothing compared to everything else he had gone through within Cynthia's legacy. Slowly his flesh parted. The tendrils spread apart like the petals of a flower opening. A hollow cavity formed just large enough to receive what rested in his hand. Cade didn't hesitate. He pressed the dungeon core against the opening and the smooth sphere slid inside. The tendrils folded inward around it, cradling the core as they receded back into the center of his abdomen. As soon as the core settled inside of him, he activated hyper-focused meditation. Every voice around him vanished. Every sensation beyond his own body disappeared. Only he and the dungeon core remained. Cade searched within himself. If this was going to work, he'd need to connect his channels to the core. The first time he had breathed the flames of desolation, he had felt something change inside his chest. He remembered the burning. The writhing. The strange awareness of his channels twisting through his body. He focused on that memory, the sensation of his channels as essence rushed through them. And slowly he found them. Faint strands spread throughout his chest. These led to his throat, his shoulders, his arms. He held the image of his metaphysical channels firmly within his mind and willed them to connect to the core now residing within him. Nothing happened. He pushed his intent harder and his channels trembled. Some shifted ever so slightly toward the dungeon core nestled within his abdomen, and hope flickered within. It was working. He tried again, but he could feel his own channels resisting his command. They bent, stretched, and shifted towards the core, but they refused to actually connect. No matter how many times he reached for them or how much will he poured into them, they always stopped just short of making a connection to the dungeon core. Frustration began creeping into his thoughts. This was the right idea. He was sure of it. So why wasn't it working? He inhaled deeply before slowly exhaling the building frustration. As he cleared his mind, he felt something within his body move. The primordial heartwood rhizome. Cade shifted his focus as he felt the rhizome's roots wrapped throughout his body begin writhing on their own. Tiny tendrils surrounding the dungeon core stretched toward its smooth surface. They pressed against it, searching for a way in. Trying to find purchase on the hard sphere. Soon dozens of roots surrounded the core from every direction. Each one probed for a weak spot, searching for a way inside, but none succeeded. The core rejected every attempt. Was he going about this the wrong way? Could a dungeon core even be used as a base for his own core? Or was this simply a fruitless folly? A failed experiment that he would look back on in embarrassment? The rhizome did not stop. It continued searching, probing for any signs of weakness to get into the core. Then Cade felt a sudden pulse from beneath his bare feet. A surge of energy rushed from below. His awareness snapped downward and he could feel power flooding upward through the roots of the great tree he had grown. He felt tiny tendrils rise from the ground beneath him and into the soles of his feet. As soon as they penetrated his flesh, a surge of energy raced through his legs before spearheading directly toward the dungeon core resting within his abdomen. Cade felt his awareness tear free from his body as the world around him dissolved into darkness. The sensation lasted only an instant before his feet settled onto familiar ground. He was back within his soul space. The endless black expanse stretched before him, broken only by the three manifestations of his laws. Closest stood the law sprout of inviolable self, its void black stem rising proudly from the darkness. Beyond it rested his two law seeds, dissolution and renewal, each quietly radiating their own presence. Cade's attention immediately drifted back to the sprout. Its roots spread through the darkness beneath it, but one remained noticeably incomplete. A single root ended abruptly where he had torn away part of his own soul in an effort to give a form of protection to the new great tree. Before he could study it further, he felt something smooth resting in his right hand. He looked down. A tiny marble no larger than his thumbnail sat in his palm. Even without the system identifying it, he instinctively knew what it was. The core of Cynthia's legacy. This was the first time he had truly seen it, or at least, this was how it appeared within his soul. He lifted the marble closer to his face and couldn't help but laugh. The core was almost identical to a yin-yang symbol from Earth. Black and white curved endlessly around one another in perfect balance. Within the white rested a single black point, while a white point lay nestled inside the black. If he had to guess, the white represented the ash tortoises while the black represented the frogs. The opposing dots were likely the Grand Elder and the Emperor, each existing within the other's half of the cycle. The more he thought about it, the more obvious it became. If someone could somehow look down upon Cynthia's legacy from high enough above, he suspected the entire realm would resemble one enormous yin-yang. At least it would have before he arrived. His smile lingered until his eyes settled upon something that didn't belong. Nestled exactly where the black and white met rested a third point. Unlike the rest of the core, this tiny spot didn't swirl or flow. It remained perfectly still, a void black dot absorbing its surroundings. The longer Cade stared at it, the more familiar it became. His laughter gradually faded as realization dawned. He slowly turned his gaze back toward the law sprout of inviolable self. Toward the broken root beneath it. The severed end possessed the exact same impossible shade of black. Understanding struck him all at once. Cade hurried toward the sprout, the tiny dungeon core still resting in his palm. Kneeling beside the exposed roots, he slowly brought the marble closer to the severed end. Before they even touched, both began to resonate. A low vibration spread through his soul space as the void black point within the core answered the damaged root. Neither pulled upon the other. Instead, they seemed to recognize one another, as though each had been waiting for the other to return. A smile crept across Cade's face as he closed the remaining distance. The instant the core touched the broken root, the connection snapped into place. Brilliant white and black roots burst outward from the marble while void black tendrils spread from the damaged root, weaving together so naturally that it became impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. The entire soul space trembled. His three laws swayed as ripples spread through the surrounding darkness, and brilliant light erupted from the newly grown root system beneath the law sprout. A familiar window materialized in Cade's mind and another smile spread across his face as he read the notification. Congratulations! You have successfully forged your own core. Advanced system synchronization commencing. The moment the dungeon core completed its connection to his soul, essence erupted outward like a river bursting through a broken dam. It surged from the core in his abdomen and raced through both his physical and metaphysical channels simultaneously, flooding pathways that were barren just moments ago. The sheer volume nearly stole his breath. Had this happened only a few days ago, before he inadvertently strengthened his channels by pushing them to the brink during the Ashen Vortex, Cade was certain the torrent would have shredded his body from the inside out. His channels simply wouldn't have been able to withstand the strain. But now his reinforced channels flexed beneath the overwhelming current, carrying the essence throughout his body. The sensation bordered on intoxicating. The core inside him pulsed. With each beat, another wave of essence flowed outward before naturally returning to the core once more. Cade immediately controlled the flow using his essence manipulation. Rather than allowing the essence to circulate aimlessly, he guided it through every channel he could sense before directing it back into the core. The familiar exercise felt almost effortless. His control had never been better. Round and round the essence flowed. Each cycle felt smoother than the last. He could feel that not only did the core house an immense amount of essence, it was also generating a continuous current. A slow smile spread across his face. This was what he'd been missing. No wonder the system placed such importance on a core. The difference wasn't merely quantitative. The core didn't simply give him access to more essence than he knew what to do with. No, this was a fundamental change in who he was. Without a core, every scrap of essence had felt precious. Each time he used his flames of desolation or fueled his prismatic conduit with essence was another step toward depleting a finite resource. But now, with the amount of essence flowing through him, the cost of his skills would barely concern him. His channels remained flooded no matter how much he cycled through them. The core simply continued replenishing the flow. For the first time, Cade felt what true abundance was like. Power hummed beneath his skin. The sensation was almost overwhelming. It felt as though his body had finally been allowed to breathe after suffocating for months. As essence coursed through him, another thought struck him. Why wasn't he putting this abundance to use? Without hesitation, Cade diverted a substantial portion of the circulating essence toward the rhizome woven around his damaged eyes. Thanks to his essence manipulation, the response was immediate. Multicolored lightning exploded across his vision. Entire branching arcs of prismatic light erupted behind his eyes, racing through his vision before vanishing only to be replaced by more. At the same time, an intense itching spread through the sockets of his eyes, deep enough that it felt as though the channels themselves were shifting beneath the surface. Cade gritted his teeth. The sensation was extremely uncomfortable, but he knew that whatever the rhizome was doing to his eyes benefited from the increased amount of essence. The rhizome greedily accepted every strand of essence he fed it. He could feel damaged channels knitting themselves back together while more of the rhizome's roots continued weaving through the ruined tissue. Carefully, Cade cracked his eyes open. The world around him remained blurred, but the improvement was unmistakable. Shapes appeared more defined than before, and colors no longer bled together quite as badly. He could now distinguish the towering golden form of Verosk from the pale ash tortoise with the pearlescent shell that was Vorduhan, even if their finer features remained hidden behind the lingering haze. His recovery was far from complete, yet for the first time since Sildrax's attack, Cade felt confident his eyesight would eventually return on its own. Relief washed over him, but before he could dwell on it further, a notification popped into his mind. Title gained Core Forger. Core Forger forge a unique core during the tutorial without relying upon the system. Plus 10% to all stats. A 10% bonus to every stat? That was certainly an unexpected bonus. He had expected some sort of title for the feat he had achieved, but not enough to warrant a plus 10% increase to all stats. And why was the title called Core Forger? He hadn't forged his own core, but instead taken the core of Cynthia's legacy as his own. Maybe Vorduhan or Verosk would know when their memories returned. The next notification appeared almost immediately. Title gained Usurper of Fate. Usurper of Fate, alter destiny and reweave the threads of fate to forge a new future for yourself. Plus 5% to all stats. Cade frowned. How did I get a title called Usurper of Fate? His first thought was of Acalion. Had rescuing the Viscount from Sildrax's corruption somehow changed fate itself? No, that couldn't be it. If that were the case, he should have received the title when he first cleansed Acalion or after destroying Sildrax's corruption within the legacy. Another notification abruptly forced both titles from his mind. Tutorial Dungeon Core destroyed. Transport to Tutorial Dungeon evaluation commencing. Before Cade could react, the world around him dissolved into brilliant white. The blinding light gradually faded until nothing remained but white. An endless white floor stretched beneath Cade's feet while an equally endless white expanse surrounded him on every side. There was no ceiling. No walls. No shadows. Only an infinite sea of white broken by a single figure seated behind a pristine white desk. The humanoid silhouette remained exactly as he remembered. Its features were indistinct, as though someone had attempted to draw a person using nothing but light. Even the desk beneath its hands seemed less like an object and more like an absence of detail carved from the surrounding whiteness. Cade looked down. Sure enough, he found himself seated in a simple white chair. So I'm back here again. Instead of acknowledging the system entity's presence, Cade closed his eyes and shifted his awareness inward. His soul space unfolded around him, just as dark and familiar as before. The three manifestations of his law still floated within, and attached to one of the roots of his law sprout of inviolable self rested the tiny yin-yang core. Cade let out a sigh of relief that the core was still there and intact. The white and black halves continued to revolve around one another while the small void black point remained seamlessly fused to the once severed root. He reached out with his senses, tempted to inspect the connection further. If his hypothesis had been correct, the dungeon core shouldn't have been destroyed. The system had merely lost track of it after he integrated it into his soul. His fingers twitched. He wanted to test it. To see if the core still connected him to Cynthia's legacy. To find out whether the realm still existed. To know if the frogs and tortoises still lived. Whether Acalion had escaped safely. Whether the great tree he had painstakingly grown still stood. The temptation lingered for only a moment before Cade forced himself to withdraw. He shouldn't check on it here. The system, and the entity in front of him, was definitely keeping a close eye on everything that happened in this room. The last thing he wanted was to bring attention to where exactly his core had come from. Reluctantly, he opened his eyes and another system notification appeared in his mind. Advanced system synchronization failed. Unknown core architecture. Reattempting advanced system synchronization. Just as I thought. Whatever Sildraxaw did to prevent the system from entering the dungeon also applied to its core. The system entity finally spoke. I offer my congratulations, Cade Whitehollow. Its calm, featureless voice hadn't changed in the slightest since he saw it during the initialization. You have successfully completed Tutorial Dungeon, Cynthia's Legacy, and you have successfully cleansed the corruption contaminating Cynthia's legacy. Its hands remained folded neatly atop the desk. You have also fulfilled the primary objectives associated with the Tutorial Dungeon quest, Cleanse Cynthia's Legacy. A faint shimmer passed across the white desk. I am authorized to distribute rewards appropriate to your performance before returning you to the tutorial. Cade looked up at the figure. His vision remained imperfect. Streaks of multicolored lightning still flashed across his sight, but the improvement from moments ago was enough that he could now make out the entity's outline far more clearly than during the initialization. He drew a slow breath. Before we do that, Cade began, I need to know something. Ask. What happened to Cynthia's legacy after the dungeon core was? He hesitated. Destroyed. The entity answered without delay. The tutorial dungeon has fulfilled its intended purpose. Tutorial dungeons are collapsed following the destruction of their dungeon core. Its voice remained entirely neutral. Cade tried to control his expression, not wanting to give anything away. Before he could ask another question, another notification materialized in his mind. Advanced system synchronization failed. Unable to interface with user's core. The entity's head tilted almost imperceptibly. Curious. For the first time since Cade had met it, the system volunteered an observation. I am unable to establish synchronization with your core. I have no record of your core architecture and cannot penetrate its boundary. This outcome is unprecedented. Cade couldn't help the small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It appears you have successfully created a core incompatible with advanced system functions. Would you like a corrective exchange? Cade's smile immediately disappeared. A corrective exchange. Affirmative. You may relinquish your current core and in exchange, the system will provide a standardized system core fully compatible with tutorial protocols. Upon acceptance, you will immediately become eligible to receive a class and profession of your choosing with a minimum guaranteed rarity of Epic for each. A pulse rippled through Cade's soul as the entity spoke. His law sprout of inviolable self trembled deep within his soul space, sending a firm certainty through him that left no room for hesitation. There was no way in hell he would accept that offer and have his path dictated by the system. Not after everything he had gone through. Cade let out a quiet snort. No thanks. The entity remained perfectly still. The offer is extremely favorable. Having access to a class and profession would allow you to catch up to your peers inside the tutorial. Cade leaned back slightly in his chair. Screw your system core. A grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. I'll make my own class and profession. His grin widened. With blackjack and hookers. Silence followed. The entity remained motionless for several seconds before finally responding. Both blackjack dealer and gigolo exist as recognized professions within the system. However, you may possess only one profession. Cade stared blankly at the entity before letting out a long sigh. He pinched the bridge of his nose. Seriously? I figured an all-knowing all-powerful system would get the reference. Anyway, it doesn't matter, forget I said that. No, I do not want a system core. Refusal has been acknowledged, but know that a standardized system core significantly simplifies advancement. It provides a stable interface between the user and the system. It allows predictive path analysis. It enables class and profession integration. It permits assistance in skill development and reduces inefficiencies. Your current core possesses none of these characteristics. Cade shrugged. I've managed this far without the system holding my hand. I'd rather rely on something that's actually mine than take your offer. You will be unable to receive a class. That's fine. You will be unable to receive a profession. I've survived this far without either, I think I'll manage. Without a system core you will be ineligible for a tutorial score. You will not appear on the tutorial rankings and you will be barred from accessing the tutorial store. Cade blinked. Seriously? Affirmative. You will be unable to utilize numerous other advanced system functions. The entity continued listing consequences with the same calm cadence it had always used. Future system assistance will be significantly reduced. Without synchronization, your path cannot be predicted. Automatic compatibility assessments will fail. Numerous optimization routines will remain unavailable. Silence settled between them. Cade considered everything the entity had just said, and while all of those functions sounded nice, it wasn't worth giving up his core. There had to be a reason the system was offering him so much to swap out his core with a system core. He had entered the tutorial without a system core. Without skills. Without any guidance whatsoever. Yet somehow, he survived and came out stronger than he was before. Cade slowly nodded. I can live with that. For the last time, I will not accept a system core. I am happy with the core that I have, even if the system cannot integrate with it. My decision is final and do not ask me again. For the briefest instant, Cade thought the entity's posture shifted. Acknowledged. Internally, Cade wondered if antagonizing the all-powerful intelligence governing the tutorial and his new reality was one of the stupider things he'd done recently, but he wanted this conversation to be over. Every passing second was another second he wasn't confirming whether his gamble had worked. Whether the frogs and tortoises still lived, and whether Cynthia's legacy had truly survived as part of his soul rather than wherever the system had previously housed it. Your completion of the tutorial dungeon quest, Cleanse Cynthia's legacy, has exceeded tutorial parameters. Although one optional objective remains incomplete, your overall performance qualifies for substantial reward allocation. Ordinarily, such rewards would require direct system integration with the user's core. A brief pause followed as Cade felt a bit of hesitation from the entity. However, as advanced system synchronization remains impossible, reward selection will be restricted to skills that do not require the system to access your core. Cade nodded once. That's fine, show me what skills I can select from and then send me back to the tutorial. I have things I need to do. Request acknowledged.